Branch South mine yesterday afternoon. It's still being investigated, but experts believe it was caused by a buildup of methane gas. That same cause also played a role in the Sago mine explosion that killed 12 West Virginia miners in 2006. Rescuers were ordered out of the Big Branch mine early this morning when methane levels became dangerously high again. According to West Virginia's governor, Joe Manchin, rescue workers had searched beyond the point at which they were putting their own lives in danger when they were finally pulled out. Before the rescue effort can resume, crews must drill boreholes into the mine to try to vent out this gas. It's expected to take until at least tomorrow evening. So the search for the 4 miners who remain unaccounted for will not proceed for at least another day. Governor Manchin giving updates today alongside state and federal officials. He promised to conduct a full investigation into what caused the explosion and to hold a public hearing. Now, the company that owns the Upper Big Branch South mine, where yesterday's explosion took place, is a company called Massey Energy. Massey Energy, one of the top 5 coal producers in the country. The Associated Press describes Massey's safety record as spotty. The Washington Post today reports that Massey has been frequently cited for safety violations, including about 50 citations at the Upper Big Branch mine in March alone. There have been 3 fatalities at this one mine over the past 12 years. In 7 of the last 10 years, according to the AP, its non-fatal injury rate has been worse than the national average for similar operations. Researchers at Think Progress have also been compiling safety information on the Upper Big Branch mine. They found today that the mine has been cited for more than 3,000 safety violations since 1995. Now, the CEO of Massey Energy is a man named Don Blankenship. Mr. Blankenship is on the board of directors of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. He's very politically active. In West Virginia, he spent more than $3 million on ads to defeat a Supreme Court justice, a state Supreme Court justice, who he expected would rule against him in a $50 million court case. The new judge, after the guy who Blankenship wanted out was defeated, the new judge, shockingly, became the deciding vote in a ruling in Mr. Blankenship's favor in that case. In November of 2008, apparently in response to a series of articles about mountaintop removal mining and a fatal fire at one of the company's mines and the buying the judge controversy, Mr. Blankenship lashed out at the newspaper that was covering him, the Charleston Gazette. He said at the time, quote, "It is as great a pleasure for me to be criticized by the communists and the atheists of the Charleston Gazette as to be applauded by my best friends, because I know they are wrong. People are cowering away from being criticized by people that are our enemies. Would we be upset if Osama bin Laden was critical of us?" Charleston Gazette, Osama bin Laden. Here's what happened in April of 2008 when ABC News tried to ask Mr. Blankenship about the buy a judge controversy.
I'll start taking a picture of you, I'm going to get shot. Don't worry.
No, how you doing, Mr. Blankenship? ABC News. Hey, sir. Don't touch my camera.
He said at the beginning there, in case you missed it, if you're going to start taking pictures of me, you're liable to get shot. That's the head of Massey Energy, one of the largest coal producers in the country. Coal mining is the industry that lost 12 workers at the Sago mine in 2006. It lost 5 that same year in Millsboro, Kentucky. It lost another 6 at the Crandall Canyon mine in Utah in 2007. It lost 13 miners in Brookwood, Alabama in 2001. Coal mining is a dangerous industry by its very nature, but there are ways to make it less dangerous, less deadly. A top official with the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration said today, all explosions are preventable. Essentially, the idea being that mining is dangerous, but mining accidents like the one that happened yesterday in Montcoal are preventable if companies that run these mines are forced to prevent them. Clearly, by their track record, the mine companies are not going to do this on their own, which means they're going to have to be forced to. In fact, they will probably fight as hard as they can to not do what regulators tell them to do because, of course, it will make them less profitable. But you know what? Digging coal out of the ground is expensive. And there is the possibility that we ought to pay for that expense in something other than the lives of the people who do the mining. Joining us now is Jeff Biggers, author of the book Reckoning at Eagle Creek, The Secret Legacy of Coal in the Heartland. Mr. Biggers, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's nice to see you.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
There's been a lot of reporting today on this particular mine owned by Massey Energy. It's racked up what seems like a lot of safety violations over the years. Can you put Massey's safety record in perspective for us? How bad are their violations considering the industry as a whole?
You know, Massey not only had 500 violations in the last year, but 10% of those violations are what we call unwarrantable failure violations, which means serious life and death issues. You know, at the same time, we really have to point out the issue of putting production over safety, Rachel, because at the same time they had an increase of those 500 violations, they tripled their coal production. And this is really part of the coal industry, and a large part of the coal industry. I don't want to say all the coal industry, but for the most part, the idea that you can continue to operate a coal mine in a continual state of violation and denial.
If these coal mine disasters are preventable, why do they keep happening? Are the fines not tough enough? Are the regulations not tight enough? Are the regulations not being enforced properly? Are they defying findings against them? What's the problem?
That's a great question. I mean, essentially, as a historian, what I have found is we've passed a century of regulated manslaughter. Over 104,000 Americans have died in our coal mines, and thousands upon thousands of coal miners still die from black lung disease. Every day, we still lose 3 coal miners to black lung disease. Think about it. In 2010, 3 coal miners daily die from black lung disease. So these regulations, what's happening? You know, for the most part, it's more profitable for a coal company to be slapped on the wrist and pay fines, even fines up to $1 million, than to halt their production. And I think that's ultimately what we're having to come to grips with is, does this regulatory system work? Do we need to change it? Do we need to have more visits, for example, instead of quarterly visits, which we've been stuck on since 1969? Perhaps we have to have 6 to 8 visits in inspections per year. There's many ways to tackle this, but I think more importantly, it's a state of mind that a crisis is never a crisis in this coal industry until we have these horrific disasters.
One of the sort of ongoing stories about mining in this country, coal mining in particular, but mining in general, and the struggle of powerful mine owners like the Don Blankenship at Massey Energy and others who've been so willing to throw their weight around in the political arena. The other side of that story has been the struggle of mine workers' unions to try to not only get access to workers, to organize workers who work in these mines, but also to try to play a role in safety issues. Right now, in 2010, this particular mine, not a union mine, generally speaking, does the presence of unions make mines any safer?
You know, that's a wonderful point to make. Virtually all the major accidents and disasters have taken place in non-union mines. And really, Massey Energy is infamous not only for their state of violations, both with underground but also surface mining, but the fact that they really were part and parcel of being aggressive about breaking up the unions in the 1980s and 1990s. And this is ultimately what we're paying for. You know, in the old days, Rachel, or in a union mine, you had union fire bosses who came in, who pointed out the violations. And it was a brotherhood to really make sure that those violations were corrected and you had a safer mine because those were members of the union that were in there. Today, we have less than 20% of our coal miners estimated who actually are in with the United Mine Workers or any sort of union. And ultimately now we're paying the price. You know, that's the problem. The coal companies and the representatives who do any kind of inspections outside of federal inspectors, they see regulations as just obstacles to production. They don't realize that regulations are about human lives. It's about protecting American citizens and the coal miners.
Jeff Biggers, author of the book Reckoning at Eagle Creek, The Secret Legacy of Coal in the Heartland. Mr. Biggers, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So do you remember the undercover pimp video that supposedly blew the lid off the corruption at ACORN, that video that helped shut down ACORN? We now have the unedited videotape of some of those incidents. And the firestorm that destroyed ACORN turns out was fueled by pure manure. That's next. Stay with us. On October 7th last year, a Republican congressman named Pete Olson of Texas introduced a resolution in Congress to honor Hannah Giles and James O'Keefe III, who the resolution said filmed investigatory videos uncovering the fraudulent and illegal practices of the Association of Community Organization for Reform Now, or ACORN. A few months earlier, of course, James O'Keefe III and Hannah Giles got the right wing in this country very excited when they released supposedly incriminating undercover videos that they filmed at local ACORN offices across the country. They claimed the videos showed Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. Giles dressed as a pimp and a prostitute, receiving assistance and advice from ACORN about how to do stuff like smuggling underage girls into the country and securing funding for their illegal prostitution business. Now, James O'Keefe and Hannah Giles were all over Fox News for this. They were lauded as the right's answer to that biased left-wing profession known as journalism. And this congressional resolution that 32 House Republicans ultimately signed onto was meant to commemorate their good work. It said, quote, whereas Hannah Giles and James O'Keefe III have displayed exemplary actions as government watchdogs and young journalists, Hannah Giles and James O'Keefe III are owed a debt of gratitude by the people of the United States. That resolution never passed the House, but 6 months after it was introduced, California Attorney General Jerry Brown released details of his investigation into the ACORN prostitution sting. And what he found suggests that the conservative activists who brought down ACORN deserve something other than just the nation's thanks, declaring that the tapes that were aired on